Well, hi, and welcome to the podcast. Again, our guest is Elliott Weiss. He's the Oliver Wight Professor Emeritus of Business Administration. He teaches, or was, I'll say welcome. I'll read the rest of your bio. You're now retired, so past tense, taught.
Yes, although I'm still teaching now and then.
Oh, okay. Well, good. So has taught, and we'll hopefully continue teaching students in the technology and operations management area at the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia. Elliott is the author of numerous articles in the areas of production and operations management. He has extensive consulting experience for both manufacturing and service companies in areas including production scheduling, workflow management, logistics, lean conversions, and total productive management. Before coming to Darden in 1987, Elliott was on the faculty of the Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University. He has a BS and a BA in Math and Economics, an MS in Operations Research, an MBA, and a PhD, all from the University of Pennsylvania, correct?
Yes, go Quakers.
Yes, so PhD in Operations Research. So given all of the experiences and the teaching, there's a lot we could dig into today. So Elliott, again, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mark. My pleasure.
Yeah. So I think it's an opportunity, as I ask a lot of guests. I'm curious to hear your origin story of why operations research was your choice of fields, and I see artifacts in your office related to lean, so I know that's important to you as well. So what's some of that origin story of how you got turned on to this whole field?
Sure. Again, Mark, thanks for having me today. Way back when, I was a math major undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, and I hit a wall. I hit a wall in a field called algebra. Up then I was good in math. I thought, this is great. I just couldn't see it anymore. But I always loved to solve problems. And so I became more interested in applied math, became interested in operations research. The idea here that I could take my mathematical and my problem solving skills and work on them on interesting problems. So I moved over into the business school and got a degree in operations management. And then started my work in healthcare way back when. I did queuing models in healthcare for maternity wards, looking at something called progressive patient care facilities. So I became interested in capacity planning. Eventually, I became interested in lean because I'm always looking for better ways to do things. So can I do things quicker? Can I do them better? Can I do them cheaper? And I quote here, Bill Gates. Bill Gates talks about two types of people, actually four types of people. You're either lazy or hardworking, you're smart or you're not smart. And he liked the lazy, smart people because they looked for ways to do things better, to do things more efficiently. And I viewed myself as kind of a lazy, smart person. I don't like to spend a lot of time on non-value added activities on Muda, as we know.
Yeah.
So as I learned more about lean, this idea of waste reduction, my little sign behind me, lean is the relentless pursuit of, I don't even have it memorized, the relentless pursuit of creating value through the strategic elimination of waste. I said, that's for me. Let me look for ways to do that. Now, I have 4 children, and in a way, it's both a curse and a blessing, this lean lens I have. Because when we're on vacation, we're out together, wherever, at a restaurant, at an amusement park, I always point out inefficiencies to them, things that could be leaned out. And they of course, all roll their eyes whenever I do that. And warms the father's heart here. My daughter actually became an industrial engineer from University of Michigan, and she now does what I do, even given all those eye rolling. It's actually a lot of fun because she ends up teaching me now more than I no longer teach her.
Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of process improvement opportunities in the world. And one thing I think we'll touch on later, when you mentioned queuing models. So if you go to an amusement park, plenty of queues. Sometimes those are masterfully managed. You go to different restaurants or grocery stores, you see all sorts of opportunities and questions around the structure of the queue and how could this be better. Yeah, it's a curse, right?
So in fact, when I go to Disney World, or when you go to Disney World, Disneyland, you often can tell the age of an attraction by the type of queue that they have. So one of the favorite attractions for children, for kids, young kids, is the Dumbo ride, where you get to ride in this elephant that's going up and down and up and down. But it's a classic batch process, because what you have to do is it runs, it stops, they let all the people off,
yeah,
and then the next people get on. So it's this this big setup time. So yeah, and you got to run in batches, and you wait forever, and the kids just love it. I don't get it. But then my favorite ride is a ride called Buzz Lightyear. Mm-hmm. And Buzz Lightyear is actually continuous flow through the ride, because the ride never stops.
Yeah,
it's moving, and you get to sit in a seat. You get the seat, but when you get up to the line, you get on a moving walkway. The walkway becomes the same speed as the ride. You sit on the ride, and then you do your ride. You shoot. Excuse me for being a little bit crazy here. And then you get up at the end of the ride. You stand up. There's a moving walkway, and you get off. And then there's a little buffer space of empty seats for the next people to get on. So it never stops. There's no setup. You get Disney likes that, because Disney doesn't want you waiting in line, because they want you out in the park. So you're buying souvenirs and meals and things like that, and enjoying it. So it's a wonderful example for me of line management.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think of, continuous flow in entertainment. Like I think of a traditional Ferris wheel, would stop to let you off and let someone else on. And then the revolution is a little bit herky-jerky, where I don't know if you've had a chance to go to one of these newer, really large Ferris wheels, like the London Eye, or there's one in Las Vegas, there's one in Orlando, where it's really truly continuously revolving. And you've got these big pods that are large enough, and the speed is slow enough that unless somebody has accessibility, mobility issues, of course, they'll stop it if need be. But it's like getting off of an elevator and getting back on an elevator, where the attraction keeps going. So you think that would keep the line at least progressing and moving along. So, but yeah, hopefully you don't get too frustrated and shake your fist at some of these attractions that aren't well designed.
No. I hope not.
Well, and then just touch on one queuing theory idea. Let's see if I remember my queuing theory education right. If you have a multi-server model, let's say a fast food restaurant that's got 4 registers, 4 people taking orders, is it pretty universally more efficient to have one queue feeding all 4 servers as opposed to separate queues?
Never say never, and never say always. But yes, for the most part, that's true.
Right.
And the idea is if I could be technical,
please.
Part of your audience, I'm sure, is technical. There's a central limit theorem going on here. So there's a reduction of variability, but kind of pooling the resources. So if you're like me and you go to the supermarket, when you're in the supermarket, you always get behind the person who is looking for their money, or has a price check.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the other lines are going faster. But here, by having the snake line, the people behind that are not affected, because I can kind of skip over them.
Yeah.
So
you do your best. You do your best to choose the line that you think is going to move along, and sometimes it's that person with a smaller number of items in the cart that then ends up taking longer than the other line. But it's funny, you see a mix sometimes. There's a group of grocery stores in Texas, Central Market, and the main registers have individual queues. The express checkouts have that single queue feeding into like 8 express lines, which seems to make it even more expressy.
So the reason for that, Mark, is the following. I've never been in on a Army base or Air Force Navy base in their PX, they actually have a single line for all of the supermarkets, I'm told. But the key issue there is for that self-help one, the time for me to go from the front of the line to the next one is short. Whereas with my cart, it's a long way to go to the next checkout counter. And given that the cart is 3 or 4 feet long, that single line going through, snaking through the supermarket gives the impression of being exceedingly long.
Yeah.
I have another example for you, though, of lean in the supermarket. I use this as an example for SMED, for single minute exchange of die. And if I could plug my book at this time, Lean Anthology is actually a story in that book as well. So think of you're in the supermarket and you're behind a person, and the person in front, that person has just finished checking out. And the clerk says that's going to be $187.32. And at that point, the person in front of you takes out their checkbook and starts writing the check. So the beginning of writing the check is a setup time, regardless of what the amount was.
Right.
It takes the same amount of time, and regardless of how big the order was. So why can't I change that to an external setup time? And I always get internal and external mixed up. The words aren't intuitive to me, but let me set it up while the clerk is running the checking through the items, then fill out the amount. So I've reduced the setup time.
Right. Yeah.
The effective setup time.
I think that's correct. Yeah. That would be external setup time. I think in that scenario, but if so, I try not to get in line behind someone who's writing a check, because that does seem like a slower cycle time. But yeah, I don't know. The store would almost have an interest in rounding, if everyone was paying by check, rounding the prices to numbers that were easier to write out longhand, just to write 100 instead of 104. I don't know, but they don't want to give away the $4. Never mind. But
another example of that, I have lots of examples of this. There's a fast food restaurant chain in Southwest Virginia and Northeast Tennessee called PALS, Sudden Service, PAL''S, like the friends. And what they do is, when you pay, if you pay with cash, they have drive-through only. If you give them coins, they don't even bother counting it. They just throw it in, so if they're off a couple cents or whatever, it doesn't matter. And the other thing that they do is they take the order, and they don't take payment when they take the order. They take payment when you actually pick up the food, and they'll have the coins ready for you that they anticipate you'll need.
Yeah.
Again, trying to reduce some of the cycle time. And they're so effective that they actually get a car through the drive-through one every 17 seconds.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that is sudden. Sudden service.
And the guy who runs it, he says, we're not a service business; we're a manufacturing business. So they have a limited menu. They've 5S the service station where they're making, they're putting the mustard and the ketchup and the hamburgers on. So it's really a great example. Example.
Yeah, and people listening might say, well, the lean principles or lean philosophy would say, well, we shouldn't have a queue, but that is a reality of many service settings, and there are lessons. I would encourage people to learn about queuing theory and incorporate that. I mean, one, I think, very visible example of managing a queue, the fast food restaurants, two of them that come to mind, Chick-fil-A and In-N-Out, will both actually, instead of having the fixed distance between the ordering box and the window, when the queue is longer, they'll put people outside, and they'll actually, kind of do kind of a mobile ordering. I assume they're trying to match the time, the flow time of how long it's going to take to prepare the food and how long it's going to take the vehicle to then get to the window. And they seem to manage that pretty dynamically.
The other thing they might be doing there is there's a whole science of the of waiting lines. And active waiting seems shorter than inactive waiting. So here the idea being that, I think that I'm getting served already. So the service encounter has started, becomes important here. So I actually have a model for this.
But sorry, before the model on that, so there's this phrase that I love: balking the queue. Like if somebody has that interaction earlier on, they're probably less likely to balk the queue and give up if they've already ordered, as opposed to waiting to order. So that seems like smart business too.
That's exactly right. So two things here. First, again, let's go back to Lean and think of a manufacturing process with Kanban. So you have Kanban, so you have this inventory, which is essentially a queue. And I need that queue because I need that queue to buffer variability, whether it's setup time, whether it's a defect, whether it's, I don't have, not every manufacturing process every time takes exactly the amount of time. So some are faster, some are slower. So I use this queue to keep my bottleneck fed. So so I need that queue when I can't remove the variability completely. So the model I have, it's called 3 E's. So 3 words that begin with E. There's elimination, enhancement, and managing expectations. So first thing I do is try to eliminate the variability. So can I schedule things? So I can go to the barber shop where I don't know how many people are coming and how many are going to be there, or I can schedule an appointment, and presumably that'll reduce the queue. We could enhance the wait. So this is the idea of somebody playing a piano in the bank for people who still go to banks, or the classic story of waiting for an elevator. So people are complaining about the waits for this elevator in an apartment building. It's going to cost a fortune to add another elevator. What do? They put a mirror in the elevator lobby. Because now all of a sudden, there's an occupied. One of the psychological rules is occupied time seems shorter than unoccupied time. So I'm occupied, fixing my shirt, my tie, looking at myself, So it's there. Or I manage expectations, So again, back to Disney World, and Disney is the master of line management. There's always signs that say this is how much longer to the ride. And they always overestimate what it is. Again, because the idea here is expected wait seems shorter than unexpected wait, or explained wait.
And Disney does a lot to try to entertain people during the wait. So back to your enhancement.
That's exactly right.
And they allow people to actually schedule times on some of the rides. I believe that there's some premium ticketing. I haven't been to Disney in a long time.
Yeah, so there's something called a fast pass where I can go and schedule. Actually, another great example. This was I saw this first in Harry Potter Land, whereas again there you had little carts that you sat in, so it was like the Buzz Lightyear. You can choose to go with your friends and ride, so 3 or 4 is sitting there. But when I do if it holds 4, but only 3 people arrive, I have all this empty capacity. So if I don't care who I'm sitting with, I can get in a shorter line and be a partner with those 3, be the 4th person again. I have this bottleneck called the ride. I have a long line. I'm having empty seats on the bottleneck. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. How can I fill that up? We'll fill that up by having these low or having the customers who don't care who they sit with fill that up.
Yeah. I'd be curious when you talk about people occupying themselves, whether it's a mirror or nowadays almost everybody is carrying around a phone as a keep yourself occupied device. I'd be curious if there's research if people are less dissatisfied with queues because they're using that time to look at Facebook or to play a game or to do something. I'd be curious.
If I were still an active researcher, it might be a project I'd work on.
Yeah. But then you have the dynamic of, let's say you're in the drive-through line at Starbucks and people are occupying themselves with their phone and they don't notice that the queue is advancing.
Yeah,
that happens too. Well, speaking of cars, and I want to make sure I didn't forget asking about one of the other artifacts in your office. For those who are just listening to the podcast, won't see this. There's a vanity plate behind you. I'll let you explain. Read the plate, and I'd love to hear the story behind it.
Well, the plate says zero muda, and actually, that's no longer in the car because I sold that car. Yeah. The other car has one that says no muda, and so my life is about zero muda or no muda, trying to get rid of as much waste as possible. So we got those vanity plates. Yeah. Now, my wife, when she hears me talk about reduction of muda, and particularly something like 5S, when I taught 5S in our MBA program, I often gave the students a project they had to go 5S something. And she says to me, Elliott, you can talk about that all you want, but never show anybody our basement.
Sure.
Because it's one of these things, Mark, you and I were talking about earlier before the podcast, the difference between knowing and doing. So I know I should 5S that basement, but doing it is something completely different.
Yeah. Well, recently there was a big, long profile of Larry Culp, who's now the CEO at GE. He had been at Danaher for a long time, great lean company. And in that profile, I blogged about it. Really good article. But in the article, he made reference to something about not doing lean at home. And like at some point, you've got to just draw the line. Now, I've heard sometimes people get in trouble where somebody in the family is trying to, quote unquote, 5S somebody else's domain. Right. So like in my home, I do a lot of the cooking. I do most of the cooking. So if my wife were to come in and organize things, it would be disorienting. And if your wife were to come and rearrange your desk there, and there are important lessons there about don't do this to somebody. Make sure you engage them and make sure the motivation is there. Elliott, if you don't have the motivation to 5S your basement, so be it.
No, but you bring up a good point here, Mark, and indeed it kind of mirrors my career as I reflect back on it. I started out as a numbers guy. I was a mathematical model, do big mathematical program, queuing models, scheduling models. And as you said, my degree was operations research. As I evolved, I now do operations management, not industrial engineering theory stuff. And what I like to say is it's the people stupid. It's not the stupid people. It's the people stupid. That what counts is how I apply this, how I implement it. It's all about change management. You know this as well as anybody. It's not the best model. In fact, go back to Larry Culp there. I quote him a lot, and I quote him incorrectly. He either said, lean is common sense vigorously applied, or he said, lean is common sense rigorously applied. So I say lean is common sense vigorously and rigorously applied. But a colleague of mine, a fellow by the name of Austin English, has told me, he gives me a quote from Mark Twain, and he says, Mark Twain said, common sense ain't common until someone points it out.
Right.
So it all goes back to, there's leadership, and I guess there's something called followership. But how do I get people engaged in this? Because otherwise I'm doing something to them. So as opposed to them doing it for themselves. Yeah. You're a consultant. Your biggest job is asking the right questions so that people can figure things out for themselves rather than you tell that to them. At the Darden School, we do the case method, the Socratic method. It's the same thing. I have to figure out the questions to ask so that they can discover something that's meaningful to them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also increasingly the leadership style in organizations of leaders not coming in and having the answers, but asking questions, listening, facilitating, guiding. That's a different approach, not just for those of us who are outside consultants.
So Mark, let me ask you a question here, because the hardest thing for me is when I quote unquote know the answer, and I really just want to tell somebody the answer, and no, but I got to pull back and say no, I can't. What do you do in that situation?
It's tough. You got get better at controlling the impulse to blurt out the answer, or like I've had opportunity. Well, I would say I started my career very much as a numbers guy. I think my interest in people and business led me to industrial engineering as opposed to other branches of engineering. But working in healthcare, I've had opportunity to be exposed to ideas that come from counseling and psychology. And I've interviewed some people, some experts about this on the podcast. There's a field of counseling, a style of counseling called motivational interviewing. And the one thing they teach in that approach is, as a counselor, as a coach, as a parent, or whatever, you have to stifle what they call the righting reflex, RIGHTING. So if we were to ever feel bad or beat ourselves up for that, I think it's helpful to remind ourselves it is very much a human nature reflex to try to be helpful. And one way to be helpful is to tell someone. I'm going to just tell you. It'll be easier if I just tell you. It'll be safer if I just tell you. And that stifles development. And so you just have to try to fight that urge and remind yourself, ask questions.
So some stories there. So I have one son who's now in a master's program in couples counseling. So the psychological thing, and we'll often get together as a family, and he'll start asking questions, and it's like, I feel like I'm being analyzed. I really don't like it. Then my daughter, who's I said was the industrial engineer who does this stuff for a living, we did a take your dad to work one day. So she works in healthcare. And we went around, and so we're talking with the head of surgery, the head of the ER, and we're talking about their problems. At the end of the day, she says to me, Dad, you're not supposed to tell them the answers. Because I was in full academic mode, trying to show how smart I was, and saying, well, did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about this? Or, this is what you ought to be doing here. And she said, that's not what we do. We're coaching them. And it's like, oh, geez. And she was so right. And, but it's hard for me to do.
It is hard. Sometimes the coach needs a coach to point out, hey, keep me honest about this, or I wanted to ask one other question as you're kind of reflecting on your career and being driven to try to eliminate waste. I mean, did you find ways to apply lean principles either to your teaching or to research methods? Thinking of the work you do as a professor.
So the answer is yes. The thing that both I and all my colleagues hate the most is grading. The grading is just, it's one of these things where, geez, it would almost be Pareto optimal. I hate grading. My students hate getting grades. Why do we do it? But it must add value for someone.
Who's the customer of the grade point average?
So, I might have a semester where I'm teaching two sections of, my very last one, I was teaching two sections of our EMBA program, 75 people each. So 150 exams to grade, and I have 2 weeks to grade them. So I get this big batch of stuff. So the question is, how can I lean that out? And what I found, what I could do is I also go for single piece flow there. So single piece flow, meaning as the exams came in, I would grade them. So I don't have to do 150 at once. Now, it turns out that a third of them come in the last day anyway, because it's not like they're sitting with a blue book and all doing it at the same time. So I still have that big batch, but it makes it much, much more palatable for me. The other thing I did, Mark, was I had a Kanban board for all my projects. So each day And the Kanban board was something like had 5 or 6 different sections. One section was ideas. So these are things I wanted to work on. And then I had something called doing stage 1, doing stage 2, waiting for response, and finished. So as I would work on projects, the little cards would move along, and I could see where I was working, or what I was working on, what needed to be done. I wouldn't start a new project until an old project was finished, because I didn't want, the whole idea behind Kanban behind the board is give me a visual representation and limit the amount of work in process. So that would help me limit the work in process. The other thing it did was it enabled me to go to co-authors, for example, and say, hey, this is overdue. You promised me this January 10th. Here it is, January 14th. Where is it? So that was empowering for me. And if I did it well, every morning I would go in and have a 3-minute stand-up meeting with myself. Kind of look at the board.
Yeah.
What am I going to work on today? What are the due dates? What's the important stuff? So it helped me prioritize things.
Yeah. Well, there are opportunities for improvement in any setting. And so that brings me finally to, not the final thing we'll talk about, but finally, the one thing that we originally intended to talk about is more from the realm of sports and Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors. I had read, and I'll link to this in the show notes, maybe some of our morning reading routines are similar, but there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how Steph Curry was trying to perfect his shot. And then Elliott had written about this and sent me a link to what he wrote. And I thought, hey, let's talk about that and other things in a podcast. So we've had a lot of the other things talk. But so what Elliott wrote is what business can learn from Steph Curry. And then there's a subheading not far into it, continuous improvement and the perfect swish. Can I ask you to kind of touch on some of the key points of how Steph Curry is working to improve his shooting?
Sure. So, yeah, Mark, we both read that same article, which is what motivated my piece. And you're reading your stuff. I see your book, Measures for Success, in the back there. We talk a lot about not reacting to noise, and looking for assignable causes, and looking at both accuracy and precision. And as I read the original article, I said, this is exactly what Steph Curry is doing. So the quote that I think he has in that article is he wants to swish the swish. So again, for the technical people in the audience, it goes way back to Taguchi and Taguchi's loss function way back when. The idea here is it's more than just good or bad.
Right.
There's degrees of goodness and degrees of badness. So I could be within spec and get my 3 points, which is what Curry's aiming for, but I could be off center.
Right.
And what Curry is trying to do is say, no, I want to be precise and accurate, get it right in the middle every single time. So we talk about action based on data, facts, and analysis. So given the current science data collection, what they can do with him is when he's practicing, he gets there's a speaker that goes on that tells him how far off center he is.
Yeah.
So he can adjust his shot to get more and more centered, get more and more consistent. And the word we use is make his process more robust.
Right.
So by robust, if he's tight and in the center, if he's off one way or the other, he may be what we would call out of control in a data sense, but he's not out of spec. So his process capability is really high, going back to our Six Sigma training and things like that. So really what he's discovered that he doesn't know he's discovered is Six Sigma analysis. And again, this idea, the more robust my process, again, meaning that the more even when there's lots of variability around, whether Now, a field goal kicker would be different. We would worry about a gust of wind or rain or something like that. He's indoors, but maybe the air conditioner's blowing one way, or he talks in the article about being tired at the end of the game, or the fan noise distracting him. So what he wants is, even if that affects his shot, it still goes in a high percentage of the time.
If his natural shot, if his natural shot has a tighter variation around center, then he's more robust to some of those effects.
That's correct.
You mentioned field goal kickers, and when thinking first of a basketball shot, a shot that's off center can still go in, but I imagine there's a function of the likelihood of being good decreases as you get off center. You're more likely to hit the rim and not get a good bounce or what have you. But like with field goal kickers, I've used the goalpost as a way of illustrating the Taguchi loss function, because in American football, of course, anything that's inside those goalposts is equally worth 3 points on a field goal. It would be a different game if you had, now with technology, you could have sort of laser lines, and you could award 4 points for a field goal that was very close to center, which would change the game and change the approach. But it seems like there might be opportunity, a similar thing for kickers, looking at their motion as a repeatable process, and can they reduce the variation in their motion, which would then translate into less variation in either the placement of the football or the placement of the basketball. It seems like there's all kinds of opportunities there.
That's right. Well, I think when in football, from what I understand, there's more variability there because you have 3 people involved. You have the person who's hiking the ball, the person who's holding the ball, and then the kicker. The quote unquote 6 Sigma snappers, long snappers, will have the same number of rotations each time and have the laces in exactly the right place consistently.
Yeah.
So again, we talk about standard work. So what's the standard work that can produce that? Yeah. Now, when I read the Curry article, though, I worry, and it goes back to your measures of success. Is he overreacting sometimes to what's just general noise? So, he has a release angle and he'll have a amount of force. So go back. I'm sure you've done the Statipult exercise or the X-pult exercise.
Yeah, or Deming would do the funnel exercise.
So again, here there's going to be some inherent variability, and he gets this sound in the back -2, +2 off.
Yeah,
some of that he shouldn't react to,
right?
Because there was no assignable cause. So the question is he actually adding variability by doing that reaction?
Well, Deming's lessons from the funnel experiment would say yes. If if the feedback is like -2 to the left, and then he immediately reacts 2 to the right, that increases the variation of dropping marbles from a funnel, or the Statipult or whatever thing you might use. I mean, I think back to my days of manufacturing, we would have specifications for engine parts. The size, for example, the diameter of a cylinder bore in the engine block. Well, there was a spec, no smaller than this, no bigger than that, but then there was also a nominal center. And one of the biggest challenges and biggest fights with management is, we would have engineers and frontline workers doing statistical process control on the center, like trying to swish the center of the basket, the center of the spec. And something would drift out of control, which was a sign of the process now is maybe on its way to becoming out of spec. And top management at the plant would say, no, don't stop the line. It's still in spec. Those parts are good, ignoring the idea that they're not equally good. And what's the quote unquote tolerance stack up of these different parts? And you think, well, no wonder we were trying to catch up to some of the Japanese competitors that would have had much more focus on not just being in spec, but taking the Steph Curry view of being in the middle and not constantly adjusting the machine. Of like, oh, this one was 47 microns bigger than the center line of the spec. That didn't mean adjust it by 47 microns. At some point, to your point, Elliott, yeah, just let the thing run if it's in control and the process capability is good enough.
So for me, again, going back to my teaching, I had a 2x2 matrix, in control, out of control, in spec, out of spec.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what you just described is something that is out of control, but in spec.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, what do you do with that? I always called that living dangerously.
Yeah.
So it says I'm making good stuff, but I really don't understand this process. So I got to be careful about it.
And were we defining quality as, well, it passed the gauge, meaning it was good and it could move on, versus what's the impact to the customer in the life and the use of that engine? And in this case, it was Cadillacs, right? So this is supposed to be a premium engine, and they weren't all perfect out in the field. And I think some of that was certainly due to living dangerously, as you call it.
Yep. Now, the other thing, of course, with Curry is use that as an example of customer requirements change over time. So here you have Curry, who's at the top of his game, and he's worried about the game changing, so he has to become even better. But one of my students pointed out when he read that article was, in fact, Curry changed the game.
Yeah.
So he was the one who raised the bar, so to speak. So the other people have to follow him, and he knows how to do this, and other people are going to have to learn how to do that if they want to compete.
Well, and when we talk about being mathematically minded people, I mean analytics and what's been learned in recent years, the idea, overgeneralizing a little bit, but the idea of the only shots you really ever want to take in a basketball game are a 3-point shot or a layup or a dunk, because the expected value of those shots is so much higher than the shots in between.
That's exactly right. Now, John Thompson, may he rest in peace, the former coach at Georgetown, complained vehemently about that, at least when the 3-point shot first came out. It's almost like your laser example for the kicker. He argued you should get more points for a closer in shot, because those are harder to get than somebody chucking it out from the outside.
Oh, meaning like a shot that's more contested.
Yeah, more contested. Yeah, not a higher probability of making it once I get it, but harder to work it inside to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about how the game has changed and the expectations of players. I just pulled up some stats. He's never played in Philly, but Brook Lopez from the NBA, 7 feet. I think he's probably 7. What is he? He's 7 feet tall. So as a center, the expectations, the voice of the customer, his first 8 years in the league, he rarely ever took a 3-point shot, like 0 per game or 0.1 per game. And then suddenly in the 2016-2017 season, he started taking 5 3-point shots a game. He had to evolve his game, and he actually makes them at a, probably typically league average percentage. But there's all kinds of lessons there related to our work and our career of you've got to make sure you evolve or otherwise end up irrelevant. There are some tall centers in the NBA who never play anymore because they can't shoot threes.
Well, think of, again, I'm a Philadelphia sports fan, so I'm going to go back to our ersatz guard or former guard, Ben Simmons, who never learned how to take a shot. And,
Yeah. And that's for somebody who has so many talents and was drafted so high and is paid so much. It's almost a mental block, it seems.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, but I think there's a lot to be learned from, whether it's, the analytics or the continuous improvement or the leadership aspects of sports. And think about applications back to our workplace. I mean, you've written other articles. Seems like there's a shared interest here in trying to extract what lessons or interesting points are there from the sports world. Is there anything else that comes to mind from recent years related to operations or lean?
In sports, not off the top of my mind, other than going back to what we talked about before and the leadership that's involved. So, basketball particularly being a team sport, getting kind of these five guys to work together. Although at the end of the game, it seems like you want that one person who can take the ball to the basket and score.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to ask about, maybe we can do another episode at some point, not to take advantage of your retirement, hopefully increase time availability, but maybe you'll be open to that at some point. But speaking of retirement and speaking of beginning of the year, this is a time when people, organizations are often reflecting about the previous year, they're planning ahead. One thing that you teach is Hoshin Conry, or strategy deployment, whatever words we want to use. When we chatted before the recording, you mentioned that you apply these concepts to looking into your retirement. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So our mutual friend Katie Anderson talks about your own personal Hoshin Conry. So I took her seminar actually after I retired, and I have no professional Hoshin Conry anymore. Mm-hmm. So the idea here is, could I apply this to my retirement? And the answer was a resounding yes. So the whole idea here is cascading some overarching goal eventually down to some daily actions. So I've categorized my goals in 3, maybe 4 categories. I talk about mind, body, and soul. So I want activities that keep my mind fresh. So I thank you, Mark, for bringing me here today, because these are the kind of conversations that does that for me. It has to be good questions and talking about that. Body, so I'm working, try to do some exercises, stay healthy. And soul, for the heart, it's more than just me, I'm part of a larger community. And then there's fun. I want to have fun too. That's kind of boring. I'm going to do a strategy or policy deployment on my life, and what a geek thing to do. But no, but maybe I have fun doing that. So what I try to do is, given those long-term goals of developing mind, body, and soul while having fun, can I roll those back into monthly or daily activities to try to make sure every day have I exercised, every day have I done something to expand my mind? What am I doing to make sure that I realize I'm part of a larger purpose in life? So there's the soul. So I've been trying to do some personal training. I've been reading more. I've actually been taking some religious study classes online. It's actually been one of the benefits of COVID. Shame we had to go through all this, but the fact that all these courses now I can take from the privacy of my own little office here has just been wonderful. So that's been a great thing for me to do. So again, it goes back to me and some of the questions you've asked. If I really believe in this lean stuff, if I really believe in continuous improvement, I ought to be able to apply it in my own personal life. So that's what I'm always looking to do, except for cleaning up my basement.
I was just going to say, but I was going to bring it back to that. I mean, there may very well be more benefit to you personally from that strategy deployment Hoshin Conry approach than the basement, unless cleaning up the basement is one of those things that, does that help with body, or you're moving stuff, carrying stuff, maybe throwing some things away, or maybe mind and soul when it comes to relations with your wife and her being happy with you or not?
I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. But I think you raise a really important point there of not just having goals, right? Because a lot of people start the year with this resolution that may be focused on a goal without then connecting it to the practical actions. So somebody may have a resolution that says, I'm going to lose some weight. Okay, well, that's just a goal. Maybe better for somebody to say, I'm going to exercise daily, and then connect it to, well, the reason why, because then when you don't feel like doing it on a certain day, when you can connect back to the purpose, I think that helps in terms of motivation and in following through. So I think, goals and actions, and like you said, having that tight connection can be really helpful.
Yeah. And then of course it's easier for me as an individual, because I don't have to balance for the most part, other people's goals and objectives, and resource allocation is a lot easier for one person than multiple people. And again, I'm not imposing this on anybody else, or having to negotiate with different divisions of the organization.
So I was going to ask, are you getting input from your wife as a key stakeholder to your mind, body, and soul success?
We're a partnership, so yes.
Yeah.
we work on this together. We share the personal trainer.
Yeah.
And she certainly encourages me to do the exercise, and the more I do with body and soul, the less I'm in her hair. So it becomes a positive as well.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I see the book behind you, and it was my defect in my process. I did mean to mention your book up front during the introductions, a book of really interesting and very, very readable case studies and scenarios related to Lean. Maybe one thing we could touch on briefly here, and again, I would encourage people to go check out the book, the Lean Anthology. There was a chapter when I was looking at the table of contents that I really took interest in. Earlier, you mentioned statistical process control, not overreacting to noise. There's a chapter there about an individual using SPC charts, or you use the terminology I like, process behavior charts, that comes from Don Wheeler. When it comes to monitoring blood sugar and managing diabetes, could you sort of share just a couple of perspectives on the application of a technical method like this, or a management method, and how that could be applied to someone's health measures and health outcomes?
Sure, Mark. So again, here the idea is within any process, within every process, there's variability, and there's standard variability, regular variability, and then there's assignable causes. What I don't want to do is overreact to this normal variability, the variability that just happens. So the fellow in this chapter was measuring his blood sugar. Blood sugars can go up and down throughout the day, depending on certain things. And as long as it's within these control limits, in the process behavior chart, we call them control limits as well, right? But they're based, as opposed to statistical process control, where we're taking a sample, we're looking at a run chart of these. So as long as we're in those limits, it's okay. And you're only going to react when there's some special cause.
Right.
Now, if our friend, and I think his name in the chapter was Tracy Scott, if he's managing his blood sugar and his doctor has given him a certain range, that's good or bad. So it goes back to our Taguchi, what's the spec limit, the spec limits. It's okay for this variability to be out of control if we're in the spec limits, because then I have a really nice tight distribution. But when I go out of control, now, hey, what happened? And his game that he played was, he made it almost like a video game. What do I do in my diet and my lifestyle with exercise to narrow this variability? So he was, turns out to be successful. And then the other way he used the data set was, as he changed his diet, he actually noticed that the variability went down. So, hey, there were enough data points that indicated that, hey, this was a process change that created a statistically significant output change, and it was for the good. So then he's going to change his control limits. He's going to be even tighter. And now, what do we say? Quality is the only race you lose by finishing. So he's going to keep going and try to get it tighter and tighter. But he's also, my other sign behind me says, don't let perfect get in the way of better.
Yeah.
So it's okay for there to be some variability there, because there has to be I can't expect exactly the same blood sugar level. But as we spoke about earlier, Mark, now the question is, how do I get the diabetic to believe this and want to do this? So it becomes a people change process, not a continuous glucose monitoring problem.
Back to, again, as you put it, the knowing doing gap.
Yep.
whether it's me flossing my teeth, that was the thing we talked about before we hit recording. I know I'm supposed to floss my teeth every day, but I sometimes fall short of that goal. And I go to the dentist and they reiterate the knowledge when it's more a question of motivation and change. When you talk about, fitness goals or health or weight, I mean, one lesson I've tried to take from process behavior charts and SPC is that your weight, even if you're at a point where you want your weight to be stable, it's not going to be the exact same number every day, especially if your scale measures tenths of a pound. So there are some, people will read advice sometimes from wellness experts who will say, to avoid overreacting, only weigh yourself once a week. I'm like, well, okay, that would be one strategy. Or you could weigh yourself every morning and just learn how to not overreact. I'm 0.4 of a pound heavier than I was yesterday. Not a big deal. I may be 0.7 pounds lighter tomorrow. This happens, and everybody's body's system is going to have its own variation based, and it depends on lifestyle and other things too.
So Mark, for the next time we get together, I have a case study on using A3 analysis for weight loss.
Wow.
So, and it talks about some of these things. And again, looking at me, there's obviously a difference between knowing and doing.
As people tend to say in this space, and it becomes a cliche, it's a journey, right?
Yes.
So good luck to you, Elliott, on your journey this year and beyond. And you've done. Let's brainstorm at some point. I mean, I'm sure we could do an entire episode at some point talking about some of your work and experience in healthcare. Elliott is also the author of a chapter from a book called Lean Tools for Service Business Model Innovation in Healthcare. Between that and other healthcare experiences, I know we could find a lot more to talk about, maybe a little bit on sports too.
That'd be great. I'd love to do it, Mark.
So again, our guest today has been Elliott Weiss. You can find his bio page and CV and all of that detail. If you go to elliottweiss.com, that forwards to the page on the Darden website. And again, I do recommend go check out the book, The Lean Anthology. It was co-authored by you, and I don't have your co-author's name handy.
Rebecca Goldberg.
Okay, so I make sure we give credit to her. So Elliott Weiss, Rebecca Goldberg. Elliott, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for being a guest today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun for me as well.